Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. My very special guest today is Gillian Ford. Good to have you again with us on the show, Gillian. Thanks.
Nice to be here.
Now, this is part 2 of our Letters to Des. I'm kind of shortening the title, but it's, of course, Letters to and from Des, pre and post Glacier View, that incredible time period within Adventist history. We're going to get started straight away. Just give us a quick summary of where we left off last week, and then you're going to read the first letter today, which I believe is quite an interesting one, to Des from J.H. Harris, and he was working at the time at Fox Valley at the Australasian division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they used to call it back then. So a quick summary of last week, and then let's, and maybe some of the revelations, and then let's get into it.
So last week we were mainly looking at the letters from Keith Parmenter to Des and Des to Keith Parmenter, 1978 and 79. And noticing that there were some good bits in there that showed that somebody from the Brinsmead camp was talking to Parmenter as early as June 1978. And then in October 1978, Parmenter writes to Des and says he won't be coming back to Avondale. So the first 2.5 pages are all these accusations, and he never talked to Des about these. He made the decision, he announced it in Australia, and then he wrote the letter. And Des wrote back a fairly stiff letter, but it was polite, pointing out these things. So that's where we got to. Today, what I did was, the next letter was going on to 1983. So I went and got another set of letters, and this is sort of part 1 of the second set. I've got to do another set. This one's mainly before Glacier View, a little bit afterwards. A mixture of things. It's not all letters. But anyway, let's get started. The main thing in here is Des dealing with Richard Hamill, who was his boss. He was the head over the pre-Glacier View committee and in charge of Des until the first day of Glacier View. So the first letter is written by J.H. Harris, a youth director in the Australasian division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, I don't remember who this is, but this is 1977, and it's written to Des after J.H. Harris has come up to do a week of prayer. So this is in May, and in July we left for America. And he talks to Des about how he found the students on the campus. Because you'll remember that George Burnside and the old men said there was upheaval at Avondale because of the new ideas of Des's new theology, and that's why I put this letter in. Dear Des, indeed, I must take a moment to respond to your kind letter of 27th of April, even though your PS directed me not to. The most significant points I took away from Avondale were these. 1, the spiritual tone of the students and their desire to deepen the same. 2, the quiet, gentle spirit of the campus. 3, the lack of one single word of criticism of administration, faculty, deans, food, or doctrinal controversy. I like the food bit. 4, the college feels in good hands, and our people have... Pardon?
The college rests in good hands.
The college rests in good hands, and our people have no reason to fear or hesitate to support the school. 5, one regret that more students are not taking advantage of the Christian underlined education opportunity offered at Avondale when government assistance is available and the costs are no more than a public institution. I do not know how many weeks of prayer I have conducted, but this one at Avondale impresses me most because of items 1 to 4 above. God bless you as you plan for an even wider service at PUC, and may your days be happy and delightful while you are absent from us. Little did he know. But, that shows that there wasn't a major problem at Avondale. My memories, because I'd been there in the 60s and 70s, were that for the most... Sorry, we were talking for a long time before we started. The faculty were united on the gospel, including the members of, like the science department, education department, and so on. And the students were fine. I mean, there would have been people like Jeff Yordan. I always mention him because I can't think of anybody else. Anyway, that sort of counters the point that there was such division at Avondale.
Yes.
Des's ideas were carving up the student body.
Yeah.
Which was used a lot.
It was. It's an important letter, and using the letterhead of the Australasian division there, so giving it a bit of authority as well. Now, would you like me to read the next one? Tell us. I've worked out how to screen share, so sometimes I'll bring up what we're reading, so people can actually have a look there.
So
as well.
Some of the accusations against Des were one, that he was causing division, but the presidents of Avondale and PUC said they had no problems with Des at all. And the second one was that he leaked the document. And so here is an advert, July 28, 1980, from Escondido, California, which is down near San Diego. And here's somebody selling the Glacier View manuscript before Glacier View takes place. Go ahead.
Now, someone has just said, I wish you could show some respect and not screen this on our National Day of Mourning, especially while the commemoration service is still taking place. Well, we thank you for that comment, but we're having a discussion and there's plenty of hours in the day where we can show our respect.
I was going to wear a crown and salute the Queen because I listened to the funeral and the committal, and it was absolutely wonderful. Of course, being British, she's been part of all of my life. And it's no disrespect to her.
No, we're not, Mike Dye, we're not offering any disrespect at all. We're just continuing on with our program, as many people are today, needing to continue on with their work. But thank you.
And the
for
Queen
your
might
comment.
say, carry on, as
Carry
usual.
on, yeah. And but thank you for watching, Mike, and enjoy your day, whether it's here or there. Okay, so let's get back to it. Now, tell us a little bit about this Vigilantes of the Faith.
I don't know anything about them. I tried to find out.
I'll read that one. We've got a big message from Lowell Tarling, actually, which I'll put up in a minute and read as well. But yeah, no disrespect. We're just carrying on as part of the day, and yes, it's a very big commemoration day today. So thanks for drawing that to our attention, Mike Dye, and we appreciate the reminder. Where is this one? Okay, here we go. And as I said, I'll try and bring some of them up on the screen, and after this, I'll just include the comment from Lowell. I think it's probably pertinent. Okay, so this is sorry, we're just getting a few little technical things ironed out here. This is Operation Glacier View, Post Office Box 2838 in July 28, 1980. So this is just before Glacier View, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the month
Yeah,
before. Well,
yeah. And
a
here we
couple of
go.
weeks
Before it, yeah. Dear friend, on August 10 to 14, about 140 Seventh-day Adventist world leaders and scholars will meet at Glacier View, Colorado, to consider Dr. Desmond Ford's 1,000-page position paper. This manuscript is supposed to be top secret, but leaked copies are already in the hands of some vigilantes of the old-time Adventist faith. We are releasing a limited edition because we believe that those who love the faith must ultimately pass judgment on Dr. Ford's theology. This manuscript is an absolutely astounding document. Sincerely yours, Vigilantes of the Faith. And then they've put rush me X number of copies of Des's 100-page
about
paper.
1,000 pages.
1,000-page position paper at $40 a copy. And I guess they were I've got a copy. It was divided into 3 booklets, I guess, wasn't it? And so this is one of them, and I've got the other 2 over here, which I will treasure. I had a few copies which I've given away. Will I get you to respond on that, and then we'll just see what Lowell had mentioned as well?
Well, in the interview with Adrian Zukoski in the October 1980 November 1980 Spectrum magazine, Adrian Zukoski interviewed Des, and he asked him about the leaking of the document, and Des said he didn't do it. He always said that, but he was accused of it. You know, there were just a list of things that he was accused of. So anyway, the next letter is from...
It's interesting that they wouldn't have even gotten permission from you guys, because they're charging to post it out. And you'd think they would have said, look, we want to send this out. Are we allowed to do it?
I mean, I always thought that the right wing would have leaked it. It was in their interest to leak the manuscript, and it's clear from this that it did happen. But also, Reuben Figure lent the manuscript to Dean Jennings, who was a friend of ours, and he copied it. I know he sent it at least to Bob Parr. So the former GC president, who was Dean Jennings' patient, it wasn't long after Glacier View that he died. It could have been his widow that gave it to Dean Jennings. So I'm sure a number of people did it, but Des got blamed for it. So the next letter is Hans Larendel, written to Des.
Just before we go on to that one, I will just bring in Lowell Tarlings. Lowell has spent a lot of time studying Adventism. The Edges of Adventism, I think, is one of his books that he's released. Is it Edges of Adventism, Lowell? Just got a little mental blank there. But I'm just interested in his thoughts as we're having this discussion today. And I can only show some of it on the screen, but I'll read the rest off to the side there. Seventh-day Adventism's General Conference should never have bitten into this argument with Des Ford. The committee simply not qualified to do so. They're CEOs, they are CEOs, not theols. Plus, they wouldn't even exist if not for my friend Alan's grandfather, Charlie
Watson,
GC president, 1930 to 1936. That's Watson as in Watson Hall. Oh, that's interesting. On the verge of the Great Depression, the church appointed as its present president, I think that might mean. Yeah, not a theologian, not a pastor, but an Australian accountant. Without him, the church would have imploded financially, and so it began to evolve into the corporation that it is today. On the theological end, the GC wants to avoid Babylon at all costs, while on the business end, it emulates IKEA and other business chains. Right now, it's replacing the White dynasty with the Wilson dynasty. They remind me of our local Blue Mountains Council. Vote for me. It can't be a good idea if they didn't think of it themselves. Yeah, thanks for that, Lowell. That just helps to give us another little bit of a backdrop to what was going on. Okay, so will I read this next one? Or is
Yes.
this? Yeah. So this is a letter from, tell us a little bit about it. I know it's March 1980.
So Hans Larendel was a theologian at Andrews University, very well known. And he spoke to both of us on the floor at Glacier View. Des was a bit of a hero for him. He sold his books. He loved Daniel. And he also sold Louis Weir's books. Now, Louis Weir had fell into disfavour with the Australasian Division, but Hans Larendel brought him back as compliant with church doctrine. So I could say to you that he came and he said to us, you know, it was very enthusiastic about Des, and he said, I didn't know about Antiochus Epiphanes. I'm upset with the church for not telling me. I don't know. I'm going to go back and study about it. Very, very positive. Now, I could tell you that, but that's just my word. But here's a letter that he wrote to Des. Because after Glacier View, of course, he slipped away.
Yes.
There was a bit of a fleeing of the disciples.
Okay,
which I could spend the whole morning illustrating, but you know.
Yeah. Okay, here is that letter, March 19, 1980, again leading up to Glacier View. Dear Des, the last few times you visited AU, we had no opportunity to meet together. I wish we could have. I'm writing you now after having read Calvin Edwards' thought-provoking paper, Christ's Entry into the Most Holy Place, fall of 1979. For the first time, I saw your position set forth in such a coherent way that I was profoundly impressed. What you tried to convey in your PUC tapes came home to me with unprecedented power. I want you to know that I not only treasure your friendship and scholarship, but also prescribe your Daniel commentary and newly released dissertation, Verdict publications, which we were talking about off air, as textbooks for my class, Apocalyptic Interpretation, which starts March 19, 1980. For the last few months, I've explained your position in a positive way in my classes and in churches in California, Florida, Tennessee, etc. Constantly, I had to rectify misconceptions of your very motives. I know that you are up against. I had to rectify misconceptions of your very motives. I know what you are up against. I have not been asked by the General Conference to evaluate your position, but now I am prepared to put all my mind your cause of a truly biblical theology of the sanctuary. I want you to know that I value your courage and wisdom in blazing the trail for a more biblical foundation of the Advent message. I have learned much from your writings and still keep learning. Be strong in the Lord and do not be discouraged. I believe the Lord is leading and has his right hand on you. Dear Des, greet your good wife for me and let me know how I can do more to stand by your side. As always, your special friend in the seminary, Hans Larendel.
And there's a PS over the page.
Oops, sorry, I'll get that back on.
I'll read it.
Read the PS for us. All yours, Gillian. Read that PS. Oh, I don't know if you can hear you when I share it. Hopefully you can still hear me. PS, it is of vital importance that we analyze the distinctions between your and Ballinger's exegesis. There is now only confusion here. The Missouri Conference president complained to me about you because his ministers concluded that you reject the year-day principle and accept E.G. White only for devotional purposes. One even wanted to hand in his credentials. Now, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure what happened there, Gillian. Could you still hear me? And when I read, if someone watching, just let me know.
I was reading and got some funny messages, but I came back in.
Yeah,
so I don't think they heard me.
No, when I put the sharing on, I think it only has my voice still going from my computer. So I'm not sure
All
what
right.
happened there. But if people watching could just let us know, if when I put the letters on the screen, can you hear us talking still? It's important that you still hear us reading. If someone could write that and let us know. Yeah, some thoughts on that. That's a powerful letter, isn't it? I see what you're saying
Well, I
there.
think it speaks for itself, and we've got a lot to read, but I'm glad he wrote the letter, because he went out after Glacier View to the West Coast and spoke to the workers and said, Des Ford is 25 years ahead of his time. But of course, it's 40-something years later and he's still ahead of his time.
Yeah, yeah. And
Um,
after the whole Glacier view thing went down, you're saying that Hans didn't actually.
well, he went down to Puerto Rico, and I've mentioned this. We had friends who were judges who were Brinsmead followers. We'd been to Puerto Rico while at PUC. Wonderful people over there. And he sent us the tape. So after Glacier View, he spoke down there, and he spoke in English, had a translator. And he said that Des was a dangerous man.
Interesting. Yeah,
Anyway,
okay.
we can pass that. I'm
Yeah,
trying
so
to keep going because
yes, let's keep going. That is, as you said, is self-explanatory. So I'll read the next one. Is that correct?
No, I'll read the next
Oh, this
one.
is Desmond Ford Raises the Sanctuary Question by Walter Utt. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, it's from the Spectrum,
Yeah.
March 1980, and I just want to read a bit of it. Now, Walter Utt had his doctorate in French history, and he was chairman of the Department of History at Pacific Union College, highly respected as a scholar. And I mentioned that he died of AIDS. I could think of it last time. He had that problem with, he had to have blood transfusions, and he got AIDS-infected blood and died, which was really sad. So he's talking about the forum meeting the previous year in October 27, 1979. And he says the challenge by Desmond Ford at the forum meeting was nothing new. Now note this. His concern for the biblicity of the Adventist doctrine of the sanctuary, the ministry of Christ, and the significance of 1844 had been shared by many Bible students for years. The difference in the present situation was the necessity for the church in the 1980s to address a question of doctrine publicly rather than discreetly in some theological dovecote. Ford's use of a public forum, plus the peculiar and controversial chemistry of the man himself, precipitated the affair. He is a veteran of the intense and seemingly continuous theological battles in his homeland, which have suggested to bemused Americans a kind of stereotype for the Antipodes, an Australian disease. And in brackets, Jill, of course, I reject the comments about the peculiar and controversial chemistry of the man himself. All he did was to raise what many scholars already knew. This desire to tell the truth was apparently peculiar and not something that real scholars do. This is more of an indictment against the scholars than Des. See, Des's big concern was he had students coming to him about the investigative judgment. I've told you the story about Edna Heiss, Lyle's mother, who was going to leave the church and shame her family until she heard Des preach the gospel, and it was all over the investigative judgment. And Des felt that if you're going to preach to the world, you must tell them the truth. That was the bottom line for Des. He felt it was wrong, especially when quite a few scholars knew about it, to keep on keeping it from the lay people and, teaching error. That's me having said my piece.
I like that line there. He's written to you in brackets, I think. The desire to tell the truth was apparently peculiar and not something that real scholars do.
And one reason for mentioning it is that when the church's scholars talk about the history of Glacier View, they distance themselves on sharing concern for the same problems that Des had, and yet they did. I think we can put that away now. I could read it all, but there's other stuff that's more important.
I'm just doing a little test to see if when it's up, we could still hear ourselves talking. Yes, we can. So that's good. And I also wanted to just put it up so that if people did want to read it later, they could just spend their own time reading that.
So when people talk about what happened at Glacier View, they will bring in this element of personality. Gilbert has done it in things he's written about Glacier View. And Wayne Judd, who I absolutely adore, who was a teacher at PUC, who was one of the forum people who set up the October Forum thinking Des would be all right, absolutely devastated when Des lost his position and never preached or took Sabbath school again. And look, he was so talented. You know, he was...
This was Calvin, did you say?
No. This was Wayne Judd.
Oh, Wayne, yes.
Well, he talks about Des's personality. And, you know, I nearly laughed out loud because Wayne, I mean, Des was so conservative. I can remember in the 60s talking to Des about the Beatles when I worked for him. And he thought I was talking about insects. He had no idea. Didn't know much about Elvis. But, I mean, Wayne was... I thought of Wayne as very outrageous. But Wayne thought that Des was. He makes
That's
out...
funny, yeah.
Yeah. So I've got an objection to people putting it down to Des's personality.
Yeah.
Because as soon as people hear that, they don't want to listen to him.
It's something I often say, the ad hominem attack, the playing of the person, not the ball. People love it's a great way to stop someone's messages getting out there by attacking them in some mild way, by saying, oh, he had a personality problem. Oh, well, let's not read anything that he writes. I really disapprove of that. Okay, so you're going to read the next one?
The next one, time-wise, I'm going to leave out, and I'm going to go on to Harry Lowe's letter to Richard Hamill, and you can read that.
I think we've got time. We've got a part 3 coming up, and I just really want to read this one. Get you to read this one.
Okay.
It's from you to Calvin, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think let's go ahead and keep reading
it.
Yeah, don't worry about the time. We'll still do like an hour and a half today, and we'll just keep on plowing ahead. We might have to do 4 instead of 3. But I think this stuff's important because it creates a tapestry of information around the event. So if you could read this one, that would be great.
So this is July 8, 1980, and it's before August 10, when Glacier View started. So our friend Doug Moorhead, who was a wonderful friend to the gospel, he published the Glacier View manuscript and Crisis, both of them in, I think, 1982. Always very, very generous to us. And he invited Des and me to stay down in a motel in New Smyrna Beach in Florida. Now, interesting thing about that beach is it's the lightning strike capital of the world, and it's the shark fatality capital of the world. And if you go into the sea, which Des did several times a day, you're either going to get zapped from above or got from below. But anyway, he still went in. So I wrote to Calvin and Nerida Edwards. Calvin was very helpful. He was at Andrews at the time and doing a little bit of research for Des and so on. Dear Calvin and Nerida, I'm writing partly because Des has mislaid Calvin's address at Fuller. I must have it for a report on the August committee. Hope you and Junior are well. Brenton had just been born and will be delighted to get news of Mr. or Mrs. Edwards when he or she makes its appearance. Oh, no. Oh, this was the daughter. So Brenton and then the daughter. You are fortunately away from the heat wave weather currently here, though, of course, those who have air conditioning don't notice it. We are among that lucky group this month, being blithely ensconced in a lovely apartment in Florida, about 50 yards from the sea, which is warm and pleasant. I have little to do but read and amuse Luke. I don't ever expect to have a repeat of such luxury, quite resigned to the possibility of becoming the breadwinner after August. So see, we did know. Or, yeah, it was sort of up and down a bit, but...
You had an inkling.
We got the manuscript, the Glacier View manuscript, finished by the original deadline. Des and I proofread, and the typist's brother did too. That would be Mary. Oh, I'm not sure who that was. And I did the corrections. Quite a massive job when all the combined effort is taken into account. 1,000 pages less 5 or 6, with many interesting appendices. Dean Jennings hopes to have it shortly. That man, as I said, he got it from Figure. Didn't get it from us. We'll see if it works out, since it is so confidential. His source is surprising, not us. You alone have read part of Des's copy. I think chapter 6 knocked Neil Wilson somewhat. He sees Des as throwing out the spirit of prophecy. Hamill has been very friendly and has said some things very surprising and open things in private and on the last 2 pre-committees. He ruined it, however, by recently taking a very negative workers' meeting on the West Coast. I don't understand it, or do I? Here in Florida, the president is very anti-Ford. Daniel is not sold in the ABCs here. The folks we know say the issues are unknown here. Des is far more optimistic, Ray, the outcome in August than me. He tells me it's a Christian duty to be positive. I feel more for you both and many others of similar age. It will likely be your age group who will have to face the music. We heard the presidents on the West Coast are waiting for the August results, and if it is negative, those workers who agree with the new theology will have to go. I hope it's a rumor. Paul Porter was with us the final week we were in Tacoma Park. He has come from Heidelberg, Germany. I'm missing a lot. From Brisbane to Harvard to begin work on his PhD. He is studying 7 languages, including Latin, Aramaic, Hebrew, French, etc. He was a real inspiration to us, told us the theme of his proposed work, fascinating, but I can't describe it since he doesn't want it out till he can get the language tools and do some research. He has been the pastor in the American Army Church in Heidelberg, very much appreciated. He found people angry because they had not been taught the gospel till then, a common reaction, but not very sensible, since we're all so dependent on so many factors and other people's work. I just wrote Ken and Eleanor, the Barretts, by the way. They mentioned they'd love to see you. Paul said the atmosphere in Germany is very ominous. Ordinary people in the street, at the barbers, etc., will express their dread of an impending Holocaust. They see America's strength as weakening and their US defense as falling far behind Russia's in the next 9 years. If Russia makes a thrust, it would be very serious. Isn't that very contemporary? Paul was glad to get out of there. Especially his wife comes next month. P.S. Our visa only extended till October this year by GC. Not sure what that means. See, they thought we'd go back to Australia. But by a miracle, mainly performed by Calvin and a lawyer, we were enabled to stay, but I won't go into that. I've received your letter with the covering materials for the Desmond Ford case, was hoping I might be able to attend. I regret that it seems very unlikely that I can be there. Anyway, I won't read the last bit because it's not pertinent.
Can I just ask about that? And please don't think that us sidetracking is a problem. We can. That was just amazing to hear that. I'm glad I got you to
see.
Do
I have that letter just before Glacier View, and then I have a letter to Ken and Eleanor Barrett.
Yeah.
Which is in the first lot of letters, so we won't get back to it for a while.
I just want to ask. Sorry, can I just interrupt? I just want to ask about Calvin, because when I was, I think my year 12 was 1980, and I'm pretty sure, was it, or maybe it was when I was a bit younger, Calvin was teaching at Avondale High School. Is that the same Calvin? There'd only be one, wouldn't there?
What year was it?
Well, I thought 1980, 79, 80, that he was at Avondale, but maybe someone that's watching can let me know, just out of interest, because it's like I was not aware of all that was going on, even though we were kind of aware of it. I was too young to
No,
really comprehend it.
he was at Andrews.
Yeah, but at some point he came to Avondale High School, and I'll ask some people I know that will know for sure about that. It's just more, it helps me fill in some gaps as well. Okay, so the next one is.
Now, hang on a minute. I was just saying about the letter in 1983 to Eleanor and Ken Barrett. That's also helpful because it shows what was in our mind. This was August the 26th, so it's after Glacier View. Des is sitting in on the second PREXAD meeting, and it's clear that I think we're probably that we're going to England. Luke had said he didn't want to go, but in that letter I express we haven't heard yet, and so on. So those two letters are helpful to give what was going on in our head.
Yeah.
Because, as I've told you, when you're in the situation that we were, the brethren really don't tell you very much. There's a lot going on behind, and it's a bit of a miracle that I've found out as much as I have with the documents I've got.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really fleshing out the whole story. Okay, so what's next?
Okay, Harry Lowe's letter. He was an invitee to Glacier View. He should have been there, but remembered it was, I think it's 9,000 feet, but I told you I'm no good at numbers. So certain people like R.H. Pearson couldn't go, and Harry Lowe couldn't go, and he explains that. And there was somebody there whose name I know, but I can't remember, who had to leave because he got very sick. And Luke actually got altitude sickness.
Wow.
Because it was so high up. So anyway, this is the beginning of the Hamill letters. I want to give you a picture of Hamill. And in his biography that he wrote before he died, which he published, he had a chapter on Glacier View. He makes the great statement, in those days, I was a company man. So we're going to see how he behaves as a company man in these letters. And Des wouldn't hear a bad word about Hamill. I think I saw it more accurately, but that's me. I'm afraid I'm not, I'm not on the same level as Des was. But Hamill had been in, I think it was Indonesia, and he'd been put in by the Japanese into an internment camp. And so Des had huge respect for the man. So anyway, we're now going to see. This is Harry Lowe's letter, and he's very clear that he knows all about these problems because he's been the head of the 1960s committee. And in my third volume, and also in volume 2, there's articles by Ray Cottrell where he spells out what happened. He was also on that committee. And it was a very secret thing. Cottrell, and I've actually got it here, did write up some notes afterwards, but they agreed not to keep notes. Everybody was terrified of, saying what they thought about the investigative judgment, though most of them, the Bible scholars, by and large, didn't agree with it. So this stuff has been going on. And anyway, carry on.
So I'll read this one. Now, one just quick thing. Someone's just asked this, and they may never get a chance to kind of ask while you're around. Can you just read that and answer that question?
Worth more than a million? Well, I've got some here. Good News in Australia would have some. Tell him to message me.
Okay.
On Facebook.
Message you on Facebook. So he's writing from YouTube, so he may need to join the group, which is in the links on the YouTube channel there. Join the Facebook group and you can message. Just checking one quick technical thing. Excuse me, everyone. I'm just messaging Adrian to test for me when I put something on the screen, our voices can still be heard. So it's important that we do that. Otherwise, we're just putting up the images there. Okay, so I'm going to read this one now, which is the one from Harry Lowe to Richard Hamill, 28th of July, again, a month before Glacier View.
Couple of weeks.
Yeah. Dear Brother Hamill, for some years I've had high blood pressure trouble. Some time ago, I spent a vacation at my son's home in Switzerland and had to be brought down in some distress from an altitude of some 5,000 feet. My doctor has been watching my pressure regularly, and he says I shall almost certainly have trouble at 9,000 feet. In addition, I have cataracts, getting to the advanced stage, and I can read only in short spells. I've been digging into the material as well as I can, but I do not think I could be through by August 10. I seem to have lived with these sanctuary and inspiration problems all of my life. My first acquaintance with SDAs was just after A.F. Ballinger left England, but one of his colleagues, Harry Champness, was still around. I became the MV leader of one of his churches. Then I worked under Conradi in the old European division, and from then on, these problems have turned up at frequent intervals till the present. Most of the men troubled by these things have been earnest men. My contacts with Desmond Ford convince me he is a humble, earnest Christian and a good student. Certainly, he has never reached to his critics. Certainly, he has never reacted to his critics as they, mainly old-timers and a few senior retirees, have reacted to him. We had emotional and unkind, bitter reactions from some of them here, and the literature from Australia that preceded Ford was harsh. The forum meeting at PUC was unfortunately thrown open to the public. 3/4 of the congregation were on Ford's side, but a few senior people reacted critically, and I must admit that Ford then spoke under some pressure a bit too bluntly, as Australians often do. He admitted this afterwards. There must be something needing study when these questions come with almost cyclic regularity. Since our small Daniel committee ending in the early 1960s, is that the one I've sometimes referred to, Gillian, where they met?
He headed the committee.
And they met several times, over a few years, couldn't come to any conclusions proving the investigative judgment with the Bible alone, and so dissolved it. And that's the one where there's no meeting and no minutes, are there? Is that the
Except
one?
for what Ray Cottrell was written after the fact.
That he'd written down
in 1966.
Yes.
And I put them in somewhere. They'll come up because of
good.
That the church has changed on, and it's
good. I'm really looking forward to that. I've got a real thing about learning more about that particular committee. I have asked myself whether I have ever been able over the years to teach, write, or preach a series of studies on our full sanctuary teachings without the help of Ellen White. I have to admit that I always have needed Ellen White quotations to prove some of the salient points of the investigative judgment, etc. If all the truths necessary for salvation are found in the Bible and the Bible only, one is left to wonder if a knowledge of the judgment sanctuary details is essential for salvation. Wow. I think your greatest problem may center in inspiration and Sister White's work for the church. I think the action taken at Dallas on fundamental beliefs had a new statement on spirit of prophecy to the effect that Sister White's work, among other things, was to reveal new truth. Was that added to make it possible to accept our sanctuary judgment on the basis of what Ellen White confirmed? That you will remember was basically the position of Siegfried Horn, Ray Cottrell, and others. and, as far as I was concerned, brought us to an impasse. I think about all the R&H articles written obviously to offset Ford's teachings in recent months, substantiate his position that 2,300 Days of Daniel 8:14 came to us from Crozier to Edson and his companions, and later was confirmed by Ellen White. I've tried to build up a complete study series on our detailed sanctuary series without using Sister White, and after much time and thought, I must admit I cannot do it in detail. I've asked scores of ministers if they can do this and have yet to find a man who can. That is such a profound paragraph. Incredible. Wow. I think we as a ministry have trained our people to accept inspiration as a permanent gift rather than a gift for special times. The bulk of our people seem to look upon inspiration as infallibility. I think this may well be a big problem at your meeting, perhaps the biggest. I shall remember you all prayerfully, that God may help every man to examine facts dispassionately rather than dealing judgmentally with a man. The care and work you have so far spent on this case leads me to think it is being taken seriously. So that's H.W. Lowe. What an interesting, I've not really known
Now,
too
we
much.
knew him. He was at St. Helena at the retirement home. He died
Right.
there. And we'd been down. I went with Des to visit him. He was the North American Division ministerial secretary, probably when he was head of that committee.
Right.
He was a Brit. He was British. A very lovely man. But I mean, that letter is an amazing letter.
Incredible.
What I've got here, and I can read this to spare you a bit. It's Richard Hamill's response to Harry Lowe, and it's September the 18th, so it's after they've put Des out. So it's 2 months later.
Yeah. I'll just bring it up onto the screen so that people can actually see it while you read it. Okay, away you go.
Dear Elder Lowe, and the thing about this letter is you've got to listen to him, be a company man, because the point about Hamill was he was on that committee in the 60s. He knew a great deal about these problems, and you will see this when Des speaks to him in the next letter, which was before Glacier View, 2 letters when he was dealing with the pre-Glacier View committee. Because he said one thing in the committee and he said one thing in the workers' meetings. He went around speaking and he told all the members of the committee they weren't to say anything, but he didn't. He was not constrained by the same restriction. And Des challenged him on it. Dear Elder Lowe, thank you so much for your letter that arrived just before the meetings at Glacier View Ranch. And another thing that you've got to take into account as I read this letter is who he's talking to. He's talking to somebody who's hugely knowledgeable about the problems. So take that into account. I shared your letter with Elder Wilson. I did not read it publicly, except for a paragraph on opening night, stressing your regret about not being able to attend and explaining the reason why. Now, if they had read out Lowe's letter,
Yes.
as well as Pearson's letter,
yes,
that would have made
I wish
them,
they.
but
I
they
wish
never
they
would have
had.
done it. They never would have done
They didn't want to show that there was support,
it. There were
and
two
that
others.
there was a lack of evidence from the Bible to confirm the sanctuary.
There were
Like
two
that.
others.
Sorry.
There were 2 others that could not attend because of the elevation, namely Elder Pearson and Elder Jorgensen, Field Secretary of the Australasian Division. On the other hand, it is quite doubtful that either of these would have attended had the meeting been held in a lower location. A few of the delegates suffered from minor headaches, but most of them, after a day or 2, began to feel adequately comfortable. Is my sound all right?
Yes.
Okay. One person, Dr. Tom Blinko, Dean of the Theological Seminary, left the first night because he had a quite severe headache. I think had he stayed by, his body would have adapted to the elevation, but he didn't want to do that. You will soon see a report in the Adventist Review regarding the meetings. We had arranged the meetings so that in each of the 4 full days, we would address ourselves to one of the 4 major issues that Dr. Ford raised in his paper. During the morning hours, the committee was divided into 7 standing subcommittees, each discussing the major issue assigned for that particular day. Each group then formulated the view of most of the members and reported the results to the full committee in session in the afternoon. After the reports from the 7 groups were read, a smaller committee met to develop a consensus for the whole group out of the 7 consensus statements. At the end of the meetings during the last half, this consensus statement was read, discussed, and approved by the full group. The small groups worked very well. There was full and free discussion. We were all surprised when each group made its report at the amount of unanimity that was manifested by both scholars and administrators on the key issues raised by Dr. Ford. Most of these issues sustained the basic Adventist teachings, although several points were acknowledged from Dr. Ford's research papers. But these were only in approaches or in fringe areas of interpretation and did not affect the basic doctrine of the sanctuary itself. No comment. Oh, I have got a comment. I've written it in here. Considering both men were on the Daniel Committee of the 1960s and Harry Lowe headed it, this comment seems to me to be evasive. Both of them knew the problems, and the point of agreement was significant.
Yeah.
Note also that Hamill showed the letter to Neil Wilson. Neil Wilson also knew that there were problems.
Yes. Yeah. Boy, that's powerful stuff, Gillian.
We did admit that there were some basic areas of our sanctuary teaching that needed further study by a key group of scholars and leaders. These areas had to do with the fact that in our traditional teaching, the blood of a sacrificial animal defiles the sanctuary. We cannot find any compelling biblical evidence for this. Since Ellen White placed so much stress on this, it does raise the question of the role of Ellen White as the final interpreter of the Bible. Most of the younger men, both administrators and scholars, did not stumble over this matter, but the older ones, including some of the key leaders, found this an almost insurmountable problem. They just could not see how Ellen White could be mistaken on a matter which they considered vital. Many of the others considered it not a core matter concerning sanctuary doctrine, since the essential doctrine would stand if we conclude that it is sin itself that defiles God's sanctuary and not the confessing of it. Another matter concerns the record of sin remaining in the sanctuary until the end. Well, Elder Lowe, thank you so much for your letter. We were sorry you could not be with us. Excuse me while I fix the typo, because I'll have to fix that in my book. Almost all of the delegates considered the meeting a very great success in that all profited by the joint study. It helped us realize just how much consensus of belief there is, even though we recognize some problems. We had hoped that Dr. Ford would be willing to state publicly in writing that inasmuch as most of the review committee did not agree with his major positions, he would be willing to re-examine the issues. I don't think re-examining the issues came into it, not when I was there anyway. He would be willing to, and that the Adventist public would not consider his tape and his written document to be his final or current position, since he was to restudy the matter. Now, I've told you, Hamill wasn't in the Friday afternoon meeting. That idea of re-examining the issues was not offered. Unless it was offered in later Prexad meetings and I wasn't there. The Australasian division gave him a letter indicating 4 points on which they would need to have assurance from him in order for them to continue his employment.
Now, there's one little sentence you missed there. Dr. Ford was very bothered on this and refused to budge an iota on his basic position.
Oh, fancy missing that out, but that's true. The letter that was given to him by Parmenter, I've talked about that before. Two of the points were things that Des could not agree to. One was damning Brinsmead, and the other one was that he was told he wasn't enough to put his ideas in his pocket and not speak about them. He had to change his mind and preach the traditional views. That's what he was told.
And do you think Des felt that he, you know, that going away and pondering it more and considering it would be just a waste of time and just a way of sidelining it? I think he'd felt that he'd come to his understanding, and that's why he wouldn't budge.
Well, he knew his standing when he got there. He said, I didn't go there to change my mind. But, I mean, the writing was on the wall. And those two conditions, because Des said to Parmenter, you mean you want me to lie about his views? And he said, no, I'm not asking you to lie, but if you can't preach the Dallas Statement, then I shouldn't have to ask you for your credentials. You should hand them in. But Des didn't resign. But it was all over at that point. Probably by the time you receive this letter, you will have seen some public statement about this, so I will not take time to explain it. When Dr. Ford left Glacier View, he felt that he could not give an affirmative answer to the AUD. I wish for you much of the Lord's blessing. We were very sorry that you could not be with us for the meeting. Now, you'll notice that he doesn't address what Harry Lowe said at all. Doesn't it?
No.
It's just
the
problems.
I can't help but wonder if Harry Lowe had been there, how much of an influence he would have had that would have been quite profound. Had he been given a microphone?
I don't think it would have made much difference. He was very feeble by that time. He was in his late 80s.
Right. How soon after Glacier View did he die?
I think within months, but I'm not absolutely sure. But that is a very wonderful letter. I'm so grateful.
Yeah. That the one that he wrote to Hamill, and the reply as well is quite informative too, isn't it?
Because, you know, especially as you go through, well, we just should carry on.
So am I reading this next one, or is this you?
You do the first column, and I'll do the second one, because it's the other point I wanted to make about what they accused him of.
Is this the men who met with Des in Washington were to give him guidance? I'll read that and the names.
So I think it was in February. It could have been March. I know it was April and July. There were 3 meetings, and they dealt with 2 chapters each time.
So I'll read the left column and where it says 12 from letter PUC scholars to Wilson.
No, I'll read that.
And you read that bit. So the first bit is really the men who met with Des in Washington, D.C., who were to give him guidance. Meetings maybe February, April, July 1980, listed in the October 1980 Ministry magazine. And that was called the Steering Committee Prexad, the Guidance Committee. So this is now post Glacier View, literally only a few weeks after though, isn't it? And the Guidance Committee, the 14 men who worked with Dr. Ford during the it's a bit wobbly in here. During the preparation of his document, Richard Hamill was the chairman. We had W.R. Lester, secretary, T.H.
Let me tell you who these people are.
Yeah, you read the list.
Glacier, he was a vice president. I think he'd just been made a vice president, but he was also head of the Biblical Research Committee, but he was not a scholar. He wasn't a trained scholar. And of course, this was part of what Pearson did to put, you know, administrators and people who, while they had a PhD, it wasn't in the area of theology. Carry on.
So we've got T.H. Blinko, Jim Cox, JJC Cox. What year did he come down to Avondale? Was that 81?
Afterwards, I don't know exactly when, but
In
I mean,
some ways, was he being shifted out here like Ellen White was to kind of move him out of the
I don't know,
way a little bit?
but I mean, he didn't believe. He was quite liberal. He didn't believe in the investigative judgment. That was well known.
Mm.
And he went to Wilson and he spoke up for Des, and he said that, you carry on and I'll try and think what it was that he said.
Gerard Damstegd, W.D. Eva, Fritz Guy. The interview with Fritz Guy was fascinating in season 2. What were your thoughts about that? We've not discussed that, I don't think.
Well, Fritz Guy and Larry Geraghty, they didn't agree. Larry Geraghty was wonderful. He wrote a couple of things that without them, one was a letter to the review afterwards, after Glacier Review, and one was an article which I've put in volume 3 about how the Dallas Statement was put together. That's something that everybody who belongs in the church should read, because it shows you how it was put together and what happened to it when it actually went to Dallas. Anyway,
we had
but anyway, the meeting, you've got to remember Fritz Guy. I don't know whether he's like, I don't know exactly what he teaches, but he doesn't believe in the sacrificial atonement in the sense that Graham Maxwell and I always forget his name, but the ethicist Jack Provencher, they're quite liberal, so they don't agree with Des on the atonement. They do agree on the investigative judgment, but I was thinking about this because I'm always thinking about these things. That when a person, you've got people who have bought in a very fundamentalist way, being very literal about the Bible, but somebody who's highly intelligent, who's gone through outside universities, they look at scripture very differently, and things like the investigative judgment recede into importance. Now, what was said at Glacier View was, we wish Des hadn't brought the subject up, because it wasn't being taught at Andrews, and we believed by evolution that it would disappear. Of course, they hadn't counted on the traditional people. They hadn't experienced what we did with the Concerned Brethren, which was constant barrage, within our notice. And our life was fairly peaceful, but what was going on outside was not. And they didn't experience that. So it wasn't worth dying over, because they saw the purpose of the Adventist Church in a much broader sense, that their ideas, their philosophies about what the church was about, these antiquated ideas that had come in traditionally, just aren't important to them. But to Des, who, of course, they accused Des of being like the Concerned Brethren because he was dealing with these issues. But the reason Des could think at the level that they were, of course he could, but he was trying to deal with the church's actual problems, with a doctrine that couldn't be supported biblically. And I mentioned to you that Des came up with a way where we could teach not the investigative judgment, but our prophetic views by using the apotellesmetic principle. We could teach virtually the same thing, but we didn't have to do it by supporting it with a wrong mode, which was historicism, and wrong dates that could not be established, that were not scriptural. Des said there's another way to do it. I think it was quite a genius idea, but I don't think they ever got that far to really think about what he was trying to say. I got it. I knew what he was saying, but I don't think a lot of people did.
People like John Rosier get it as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And Milton. Very sharp.
And Milton, yeah.
And
Let's
Ellie.
get
Ellie Gonzalez.
yes, yes.
Fleetwood Mac. I mean, he
Yes.
knows a lot of these things.
Yeah.
My horseman of the apocalyptic, I call them.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So we'll go back to this, and I'll just quickly finish reading those names, and then you'll read the right-hand column. So we've got Gerhard Hassel, Bill Johnson, who was the first interview in season 2 where this whole thing exploded for me. And by the way, those watching, am working on having season 2 up on YouTube when I can. And sorry, Gillian's disappeared there for a second.
I'm back.
And Robert Olson, J.R. Spangler, Kenneth Strand, Fred Veltman, and Don Yost. What a fascinating committee.
So that's Don Yost is his name. He was the head of archives, but he was not qualified to be on that committee.
I mean, because of those, some are qualified, some aren't. Because of that, it's a fascinating group of people, a fascinating committee. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall.
So Gerard Damsteed, who's a historian, extremely conservative, and Gerhard Hassel, of course, very conservative. But see, Des said to, and of course people will think this is arrogant, but it's the facts. He said the committee was not qualified to read his paper, which is quite... Now
you're going to read it says from letter PUC scholars to Wilson.
Okay, so the
after
PUC,
Glacier View.
And that's in volume 2. There's a letter from the PUC scholars. I don't have any signatures on it, but I'm sure they would have had. And it's not a letter, it's actually an article. So point 12 of this paper, and I wanted to bring this out, like the personality thing, these are the excuses that the scholars made that put Des down. It's been, and I talked about this with Spangler last week, and that incident at Tahoe where he sneered at Des and said, "You're no scholar." Just like that.
Incredible.
Oh, anyway.
They're those put-downs we keep referring back to.
So it shows that this was what was being talked about, and it still is, the implication that Des wasn't much of a scholar. It has been suggested by some that Ford is not a scholar, and that this embarrassing deficit makes it difficult for the scholars to support him. He's accused of being careless with sources in his eagerness to make his points. Now, Des was never accused by that at his university preachers, and he said they accused him of it. They accused him of it in the Friday afternoon, the Prexat meeting. He said they never, ever brought me any evidence.
Yeah.
Of actually...
Yeah. So if I'm being careless with my sources, where is the evidence of my being careless? And they weren't able to bring to this day any of that evidence.
And the other thing is, that was a 1,000-page document, which he had to do in 5 months. And with all sorts of problems, and very few people could have done it.
Yeah.
Anyway, not much sympathy, I might say. Of synthesizing and generalizing from too limited a database, and of passionately believing that his answers make a difference rather than viewing his endeavors from a detached and objective perspective. So this is the accusation. And still carries over when they write histories. The implication that Des wasn't much of a scholar, and you have quality problems. And of course, these are things that really irritate me.
And that's why, as you said, you've got a little note there. Statements such as the above are one reason I'm putting these letters in the books and putting the books together.
Interestingly enough, such a limited definition of scholarship, this is back to them, rules out many of the great theorizers and synthesizers of the past, including such as Descartes, Newton, Freud, and possibly Einstein. In any case, Hans Larendel, one of the seminary scholars in attendance at Glacier View, stated in a public meeting held after the Colorado, gathering that Ford was one of the greatest scholars in the Adventist Church. So hands went like this. Another scholar from the same institution, James Cox, said publicly that Ford had raised questions that must be considered by the church. While some of his solutions for the problems were good, others were not as satisfactory. So the scholars who knew anything, I don't mean the traditional ones, but most of the best scholars knew that the problems he presented were accurate. They didn't agree with all his solutions, which is fine. Des said, give me your solutions. Still another scholar from the seminary, William Johnson, also speaking after the Glacier View meeting, praised Ford's contribution to the church's understanding of the book of Hebrews. Furthermore, many of those who attended have indicated that their minds have been stretched by reading Ford's documents and that time was too limited to them to fully digest it, and so on and so on. So we'll get on to, looks like I've got to read this one. Although you could be Des, if you like.
No, you read. We've got a deal that you're reading the Des stuff, and we'll take.
So I put those little bits in to give you a little bit of background about what was said.
Yeah.
And still is said. You know.
So this is now Des's letter to Richard Hamill, April 2, 1980, leading up to Glacier View.
So they're about to have their second lot of meeting, and this is Des's commentary on the first one, and it didn't get any better, I might say. I wasn't present, but I've talked to Des a lot about this, and he said to me it never got any better. Dear Dr. Hamill, as one vitally concerned in our meeting this Friday and Sunday, may I share a conviction with you? Having studied closely the criticisms of my first chapter, I'm very disappointed to find that most of the writers have dealt on very secondary points and often insignificant matters, such as dangling participle, reversed initials, typographical errors, debatable issues in history. One has even dragged in my PhD Manchester thesis. The real issues have been studiously avoided. I have written an article discussing these criticisms in some detail, but may decide to scrap it, and I think he did, if my fears concerning the coming meetings prove groundless. Honest criticism does not come to negative conclusions through avoiding the central issues and dwelling on trivia such as grammar, dates, and initials. Similarly, every critic in art, literature, theology, etc., worth his salt, has recognized that genuine criticism means judging or assessing, must always include recognition of the good, as well as disparagement of the bad. This is significantly missing from most of the letters I've received from the committee, and indicates either that they are unaware how a critique should operate if worthy of that name, or that the writers through prejudice have made up their minds beforehand, and in order to have something to say, practice nitpicking rather than grapple with the issues. On Friday, it seems to me, a choice to get into the heart of the matter or spend our time on trivia, which is not decisive one way or another. Do not the important matters include the following? 1. Is it true that at least several of the basic arguments used for our traditional sanctuary doctrine in the 19th century have in the 20th appeared untenable to a significant number of Adventist scholars? For example, do our scholars today use the old arguments for within the veil, Hagia, Hebrews 9:23, and the key verses of Hebrews 9, 8, 12, 24 to 25? 2. Is it true that a significant number of scholars have refused to even patch up the argumentation for the traditional position and admit that to them there does not seem much evidence at all in Scripture for our traditional position, and that therefore we should rely on the spirit of prophecy for the doctrine? 3. Is it true that practically all classical commentaries on Hebrews have seen chapter 9 as applying the Day of Atonement to what Christ has already done. 4. Is it true that practically all classical commentaries on Hebrews have seen 9:8 as saying that the first apartment represented not a ministry in heaven, but the limited Jewish cultic practices? 5. Is it true that practically all classical commentaries on Hebrews have seen in that book overwhelming evidence that the second apartment of the earthly sanctuary was a symbol of heaven itself, where Christ ascended to be our priest? 6. Is it true again that such scholars affirm that the Old Testament sanctuary type teaches by way of antithesis as well as similarity, e.g. Christ was not of the tribe of Levi, does not offer sacrifices continually, has sat down as king, rather than continually working at procuring reconciliation? The atonement was made on earth, not in heaven. 7. Is it true that there is no basis whatever in Hebrews 9 for teaching that there was in Paul's day a cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary, yet future? These, it seems to me, are some of the key issues. I await with concern to see whether the brethren will really get to these, or whether instead they will dwell on peripheral matters instead. Repeated. I'm sure you are also concerned as to whether the committee has dealt fairly. So far, it seems to me that most of the writers replying on the first chapter have none, inasmuch as they have left the main issues alone and made much out of little. I trust under your direction this trend can be remedied. With the warmest of good wishes. P.S. I would not wish to be understood as ungrateful for minute corrections in matters typographical or historical. All of these that to me seem accurate will be incorporated in the final draft. The initial chapter was written in 3 weeks to make sure that the typist could complete it in time. Even then, this did not prove possible, as GC took a week after I offered the chapter for typing to find someone. It was not intended to precisely represent the final presentation, but an initial foray. If we spend hours trying to check on these matters of minutiae in committee, which I can do for myself out of committee, and neglect the real issues listed above, it would be most unfortunate and confidence eroding for those who learn in the proceedings. Typical of the factors that prompted me to write an article on the replies of the committee are the following. 1. From most members, I've received no comment at all on my chapter on Hebrews, though replies were scheduled for posting on the 25th. None of the ones received touch in detail on any of the major issues of that paper. Mere assertions suffice. 2. One committee member who has not sent a line on either chapter has made repeated prejudicial statements that LLU, PUC, AU and CUC. Thus, while hundreds can be given the impression that this writer's position is untenable, not a syllable of evidence is given by the critic to the poor brother labouring under so much grievous error. 3. Several on the committee have publicly avowed my position to be that of Ballinger, despite my written disclaimers to the contrary, and despite overwhelming evidence that Ballinger was linked by Ellen White with the J.H. Kellogg heresy, a semi-pantheistic teaching threatening the personality of God and the reality of his dwelling place. Ballinger taught that Christ administered in a pre-incarnation sanctuary for 4,000 years. I know nobody teaching such an idea today. 4. But as previously mentioned, the major disconcerting factor is that the majority of reviewers have refused to deal with the central issues and contented themselves with stylistic or other peripheral matters. Not one reviewer has offered any detailed evidence as to why his personal belief differs from this writer's on the meaning of within the veil, Tahagia, the dominance of Hebrews 9 by the Day of Atonement, and the phenomenon of so many SDA scholars repudiating the old scholar arguments on the investigative judgment. Copies to Elder Wilson, Bradford, Geneva, and Spangler.
Which Bradford?
Charles.
Right.
Charles Bradford, the black. I think he was the North American Division president, NAD president.
Right. I can. This is brilliant stuff. Well, I'm putting season 2, as I mentioned earlier, edited up onto YouTube, but I'm also going to be making available on a hard drive all of the 86 interviews unedited, and I'm going to include particularly these 3 plus some other bonus ones we've had on Inside Scoop, because this material is really helping me and hopefully others see the big picture. And I can now see why you've sometimes felt, these are my words, but a sense of mild betrayal from some of the people who are actually on this guidance committee, because how come they let, for example, that letter we read earlier that was the PUC scholars to Wilson after Glacier View, how come they let some of those misconceptions get through into those letters? Well, there's at least 1, 2, 3. I'm just looking at the list now. 4, 5, 6, 7 people on that list on the committee. Why didn't they step in and present the more accurate view that they knew very well, and that these letters are confirming, reassured Des behind the scenes that they were supportive? I can now see more than ever before why you would be feeling a mild sense of betrayal.
Well, fortunately, having gone through it all again, it does sort of, you deal with it.
Yeah, I'm not saying you necessarily feel that now, but in season 2, I was still grasping the big picture and learning about it, and I couldn't quite grasp why I saw these guys that we listed in the committee as heroes that were just kind of quietly supporting Des behind the scenes. But I'm seeing in some of today's letters that in some ways they were creating an even worse injustice towards Des and what was actually being said.
You asked about Fritz Guy and his talk, his interview. You've got to remember, in his 90s, and so he said in it, I mean, most of it, he was very nice about Des, and he said,
yeah,
the outcome couldn't have been any different, but he said, I'm glad Des did it, because he appears to think that the church has changed because of it. But of course, I can tell you, when you're in an institution like PUC or Loma Linda, is very different to the experience of the common Adventists in the local church.
And look who is president of the Adventist Church. This change they've talked about for 40 years. I even said to Bill Johnson in the interview, so you've had 40 years now to do it the slow way and to slowly have it that the investigative judgment is not being taught. And how has that worked out for you? Because it's worse than ever. I think Des was and yourself as well. You could see the big picture of Adventism. You weren't just looking in the small bubble of the PUC realm and that scholarly academic realm. You could see the big picture, and I think the pastoral care that Des was hoping to bring into the Adventist community, it was very insightful and ahead of his time. You both had this, I think.
Well, because of circumstances, the various things that happened, but we saw a providence in it. Of course, it didn't work, but anyway, back to the meeting. Now, let me just tell you about Fritz Guy and Larry Geraghty and what they said. Fritz Guy was very wishy-washy on the 10-point statement, and Bill Johnson, I won't go. I've talked in a separate talk about Bill Johnson, who I find extremely hard to understand, because he did understand the problems, and he told Elaine in 2000, I think it was 2002, when she was talking, she was, doing the mediation thing, practicing really, and he was sort of negotiating with Jan Paulson at the time. And he said, "Oh, the investigative judgment. Nobody in America believes it. It's a terrible doctrine." He said that to Elaine.
Yeah.
And I'm probably not supposed to say that, but Elaine doesn't
Well,
even remember it now. I have a memory. Those things glued to my head.
yeah, of
Okay, now
course.
let me finish. Let me finish, because I'll lose my track. I'm very good at it. But even he was worried. He said, "I'm worried about that 10-point statement." And apparently, I don't know whether I got it from his talk or from what Len told me, he didn't really find out about the use of the 10-point statement until he talked to Norm Young on a visit to Australia. And he kept saying, "I'm worried about that 10-point statement." But I mean, to not know what happened, how they muted the consensus statements, which Bill and Fritz had worked on. And Bill thought for years, it could have, I don't know how it could have been 20 years, that Des refused the consensus, which he didn't at all. But to me, Bill should have found out. Bill's responsible for finding out these things to some degree. But the scholars generally did not understand how the 10-point statement was used to discipline Des. And I've gone over that multitudes of times. And that showed up. You know, they couldn't remember whether it was very vague about the details, and yet it's very key. It's very, very key to understanding Glacier View, that you link it back with the Dallas statement, where the decision was made with Neil Wilson and his father sitting together, that they would use the Dallas statement and that Glacier View would not go further. Those decisions were made at general conferences. And so he comes to Glacier View and he stands up at the beginning and he basically says this: "We've come up with the Dallas statement. We are not, this week is not going to change it." Neil Wilson he's true to what he did. He states it very clearly. It's just that people haven't got it. And the scholars in their interviews, they haven't got a clue. John Brunt, Alden Thompson, you know, the way he spoke. Now, you talk about demeaning Des. Alden Thompson did it. You know, he said he wasn't right. Well, and
in the actual interview I did with him, I was very surprised at that.
And he said, "Oh, he was just a newcomer. He come into the church. We of the fifth generation." And I thought to myself, this guy listening to himself, has he read about the Pharisees in the Bible? You know, I shouldn't have said this. Just wipe that bit out.
Now, I want to just ask you one thing. This letter, Des's letter to Richard Hamill, April 2, this is the second letter he wrote, or is it doubled up here? It's got Des's letter to Richard Hamill, April 2, and then it's got...
Oh, yes.
It might have been doubled up. It looks like it is the same one.
Wait a minute.
Although it looks...
I may have not changed the date.
But no, it does look different towards the end. Yeah, so it is different.
Yeah,
but it might be
I haven't changed the date at the top. It's so what is the July the 3rd.
Okay, so this is July 3.
Thank you. So I shall have to go back and make sure that's right.
What I'd love to do today, it's a hefty letter, but I'd like to finish today on this letter, because that then wraps up this little part of this Hamill kind of section of our series on these letters to Des, and then we can
really, those two letters from 1994, they put the ice cream on the cake, because
exactly, yeah, that's why I want to read this one now, and then next week we'll kick off again, if you're free next week, same time. The letter, this is Jill to Ken and Eleanor Barrett. We'll kick off next week with that one. I think this has been very important to do this. So let's read this one now. You'll read this. It's the letter to Richard Hamill, and it's July, what was it again?
The 3rd.
So just putting it up.
Thank you for finding my typo. I'm very
I almost didn't notice that. I thought it was a double of the previous, but as I looked to the end, I realized, no, it's a different altogether. So
I might say to you that I don't have the response of Hamill to this. I think it's the second letter. We have had it, possibly went to Milton Hook, and it's floating around somewhere.
Boy, it'd be good
where
to
he
find.
denied bad-mouthing Des, and he said, I don't comment on anything that I agree with you on. So that was how he responded.
Right. And he was the one that later said he was a company man.
I have spent a lot of time ferreting around looking for that letter, and I couldn't find it. But it may turn up.
So one last time, correct us on that date again, because I've put it up on the screen now, just so people watching
July
can know.
the 3rd.
July 3. Great. Yeah. I will let you read this.
Remember that all of this stuff, the main idea is for researchers to use these books to make sure that the collection is easy of access. Now, there will be gaps, but they will know that there are responses to these letters that I don't have, but they'll be able to find in Adventist archives after a certain time. So even though, you know, some things got thrown away or mislaid or whatever, it wasn't done purposely. I told you about this filing.
Yes. Hey, someone has also written and clarified the Calvin Edwards thing for me, because I knew it was around that time. Calvin was at Avondale in 1978. So it was when I was in year 10 that he was one of my teachers there in 78.
Right.
And so he was about to head off. And he was about to head off to the States that next year. So it's fascinating to me reading the material that your letter before, which was 1979, I think. Just to know that he went from being my classroom teacher, and then he was in the milieu of all the Glacier View stuff in the States. And he went on to work for Good News Unlimited, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
Very, very clever.
Where is he now? Do you keep in touch with him at all?
I don't keep in touch with him. Iris does. She mentioned him.
I'd love to track him down and do an interview with him.
He works independently.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got his own business, fundraising, or at least he was. Yeah.
Right, let's do this letter.
Dear Dr. Hamill, now this is in July, so it's just before Glacier View. I trust you are feeling more and more relaxed as the heavy burden of so many years recede. You have more than earned a long and happy retirement. So he retired as Glacier View began, but I mean, he was there.
Right.
We both hope it will be restful and yet, as with your earlier years, fruitful for the church. You would want me to be entirely frank with you, and I must confess to an unease because of reports of your talk on the committee's business given at Auburn Academy campus camp meeting a week ago. You admonished all of us not to talk on the sanctuary issue till it had been dealt with at Glacier View. Yet you have spoken to groups such as one, including students at Andrews University, to the whole Washington community through the Sligonian. That was the article I talked about. And now at camp meeting to a group of ministers. Others on committee have done similarly. And I've had reports from Canada, California, and various other places about prejudicial statements made by GC men to our people and workers on an issue not yet resolved. This is not only the case with committee men, but also other GC representatives whom I could list. What concerns me most, however, is the attitude you seem to have conveyed at this recent meeting. I hasten to add that I've been personally so often misquoted that I fully realise the same could happen in your instance, but the various reports I've received of comments by you amount to the same thing. You have, for the most part, accurately represented my position, but you do not seem to have been as accurate in passing on your own understanding of the true situation. For example, the assessment of one listener was that you had judged that Dr. Ford has looked at the mistakes of others so much he's eventually come to the point of not being able to discern truth.
Wow.
You may have stated this as a general principle, but it seemed obvious you were applying it personally in my case. Also, according to your statement, I am guilty of using unfairly a translation that suits my theology, such as the NIV of Hebrews 9. Again, I am supposed to teach that the main meaning of Daniel for us is Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, is this fair, Dr. Hamill? These statements do not match at all your own frank statements on committee. May I remind you of but a few of these?
Mm.
1. On committee, you frankly expressed the reality of our sanctuary problem and have told
Sorry,
us...
can I just ask, when he's saying on committee, is he referring to that one that Lowe was chairing in the 60s?
No, he's talking about the
This recent one?
pre-Glacier committee.
Yes, yes. Sorry, go
So
ahead.
he's said this in the committee with all the committee members around him.
Yes.
Yet here is Ford, who, because he has mentioned the same problems, is unable to discern truth. When I asked you on the committee as to why you believed in the investigative judgment, your reply was so frank and honest that it devastated some, such as Bob Spangler and others. So much so that Bob gently chided you publicly the next day. You have stated that the possibility of the verb in Daniel 8:14 being accurately translated cleansed is so slight that it's not even worth discussing. In fact, you passed right over that issue in committee till I drew your attention to it. In other words, you frankly admitted to all of us that there is no linguistic connection between Daniel 8:14 and Leviticus 16. Yet when I say the same, you inform our workers that I've looked at the problem so long, I'm now unable to discern truth. When reminding us that Dr. Hazel is preparing a statement as to whether sacrificial blood defiles the sanctuary, you affirmed it would be useful, for when Dr. Hazel has done his best, there is very little evidence for this traditional position. 5. On committee, several times you have alluded to the fact that the context of Daniel 8:14 does not support our usual interpretation of that verse. You have also stated that the New Testament does not teach actual apartments in heaven, and that Christ certainly went directly into the presence of God at his ascension. I could list other concessions made by you, which are all on the tape, to be preserved in the archives and to be studied by our historians of the future, who, by the way, may give quite a different assessment to the committee's work than by you to the workers at camp meeting. Not only are you well aware of the reality of the problems I've raised again, but you also know that the committee men, almost for the most part, are sensitive to these difficulties. You have remarked on the fact that many of the men have been strangely silent in our discussions. They may claim that despite their silence, they actually have very strong convictions in these matters. But was not the church delegating them to share those convictions with me, to help me out of my error? You know perfectly that very little help was forthcoming. Most men on the committee said next to nothing on all the crucial issues. I believe in one instance there may have been judicial wisdom in that silence, Duncan Eva, but I can devise no excuse for the others. These same men have not even given me the frequently requested critiques of most of the chapters, and even those who have given critiques have been very skimpy, clutching at straws and ignoring my main areas of contention. Were those critiques studied by an impartial scholar outside the denomination, what sort of impression would be given? Thus you know well the thinness of the traditional case, even as evidenced by the committee members, but you have conveyed a different impression to the workers just a week ago. This does not seem right, cannot be pleasing to the God of truth. Should you not have been as frank with these brother ministers as with the committee? As for the accusation that I am unfair in my use of the NIV, you are too much of a New Testament scholar not to know that the NIV on Hebrews 9:12 conveys the consensus of most scholarship regarding the meaning of Tarhagia. Hebrews 9:6-8, 12, 24-25, 10:19 are clear that this particularly holy place is the one entered but once a year through the veil, and only by the high priest. What else could it be but the most holy? The NIV is correct. Furthermore, You are aware that I have not based my argument on any version, but on the original Greek as understood in its context. In Hebrews 9, the theme is the Day of Atonement, fulfilled by Christ in the cross event. Please read my introduction to chapter 2. Furthermore, I am quite clear in my presentation on Daniel that Antiochus is not the main meaning of the little horn prophecy for us today, and that the application to Rome, pagan and papal, has been the relevant application since Israel's failure. To see Antiochus as a first application is no more dangerous to our cause than to see in Matthew 24 a prophecy first of AD 70. I could list other matters, but as mentioned, my main concern is not the subjective presentation of my case by you, but your conveying of a false impression regarding your own appraisal of the sanctuary problem. You told us that the more you chewed on the problem, the bigger it grew in your mind. What he actually said was, Hamill, he wasn't always an Adventist, and when he was young, he went hunting with his relatives, and they shot a bear and they ate the meat, and he got a piece stuck in his throat, and he said that it's like these sanctuary problems. The more you chew it, the bigger it gets. That's what he actually said. Dr. Hamill, we who are loyal to
the last little sentence there's, why not admit that to the workers rather than give an opposite impression? That is such an important sentence. And why didn't they? Why didn't they admit that to the workers rather than give an opposite
It's
impression?
a mystery.
I think they're weak. They don't want to rock the boat. They love the little comfy warm bubble they're living in. And I get that.
We don't know, and we can't really judge. Anyway.
That's me. That's my assessment, Gillian.
Dr. Hamill, we who are loyal to the church are in danger of violating principle by trying to support some things which cannot be truthfully supported. I guess my wife's reaction is typical of the way many non-workers and also non-SDAs would react. She tells me that worldly employers have treated their employees with more frankness and openness than often happens in the SDA church. She hears all these reports of committee men giving impressions that are not true. She finds it hard to reconcile to our claims to be following the truth. When she hears, for instance, what I only heard last week, that Elder Patzer had given instructions to the switchboard that they must not allow me to make any long-distance calls, this seems to her a most strange phenomenon, indicated that some men have passed judgment already on an issue not yet discussed. When she also knows that I do not bother to record most of my minor expenses, many dollars of Xeroxing at Library of Congress, etc., and that she herself has no intention of availing herself of your kind offer to reimburse her for her typing hours, which amount to hundreds of dollars. Elder Patz's action seems very petty. I have not been in the habit of using the GC phone, except in response to those appealing for me to phone them back collect. And then he mentioned Elder Larson's materials. I don't know what he's referring to. But it's interesting, when we were in England, and Des got this also in Australia, he had a letter from the treasurers of both places thanking him because he didn't bill for expenses. And it's pretty much the same that we paid his expenses. So he didn't put in for rental or travel when he was at Manchester. And they noticed it so much that he got a letter independently from both treasurers, because that was Des. He was as careful. He was very careful. I'm not like it.
Yes.
Careful with the church's money as his own. So anyway.
I just want to quickly, we'll go back to that letter. I want you to finish reading it, but someone has just asked, is there anywhere we can get a copy of this or even Mr. Desford's presentation? I'd like to further study. So this, to whoever is asking that, I should be able to see.
This is going in volume 3 of my book.
This will be in volume 3, so I'm just putting up.
And ultimately, the PDFs will go up on Desford's website
as well.
I'm not ready to do that yet. But
to Jasper, who just asked that question, Gillian has written 2 volumes On the Way to Glacier View, Volume 1 and 2, and what we're reading today is going to be in Volume 3, which I've put coming soon. So we'll see. Now back to that letter, and just a funny little thing here. Moto Sapien has written, haha, wait, am I late today or am I early for tomorrow? You're late for today, Moto Sapien. I don't know why the notifications aren't working. Gillian's had the same problem. I
That's my friend
apologize.
from Tahoe.
That's right. And Jasper has just written, thank you so much. And I think also, Jasper, if you go and have a look at season 2 on Facebook, you're in the Facebook group, just scroll right the way down and look for season 2, starting with the interview with Bill Johnson. You will have incredible journey through 86 interviews, many over 2.5 hours of incredible material. I'd encourage you to do that. And we look forward to, I think, one thing that I'm personally hoping is that one day someone will look at all this material that we've put, as well as all the other information out there, and put together a really concise kind of book and timeline period of this era. So going back to that letter, and we're up to the use of elder license materials by GC as a similar phenomenon.
Peter, I'd like to ask you, pretty please, if we could read these 2 pages from 1994, because they make more sense after listening to these letters.
Sure. Yeah. This
This
is coming up after this.
You can read them because my voice is going. Okay. May I say again? Yeah.
So I was just going to say, yep, we'll read this one first, finish this first, then we'll do that one. Good idea.
May I say again that my main concern is not the fact that you spoke on committee business to workers, though you warned us all not to do it, but that you conveyed an untrue impression to them regarding your own estimate of the sanctuary problem, which he did to Harry Lowe.
Yes.
If Glacier View committee men behave similarly, what hope has the church for God's blessing? It seems to me that God cannot bless us individually or as a church unless we practice his golden rule, which includes fairness and honesty. I regard you as a man of God and a thorough Christian, but I must confess to being disappointed in you. That's about as strong.
That's powerful. And I think what a lot of these kind of company men that did align themselves with a lot of Des's teachings, they were hoping that it would just morph more slowly at a later date. I love that Des was saying, in essence, no, these are the things that need to be brought about now. You know, the fairness, the honesty, they need to come out now.
Well, especially
that last line.
Especially because Bob Brinsmead had brought his book out. And see, Des thought he needed to be answered.
Yeah.
Which the church never does. The church usually sits tight. It doesn't answer.
Yeah.
You know, Des
that's what they're doing now with the women's ordination debate, isn't it? You just sit tight, hope it'll go away. And that's my point, is that the hope it goes away kind of diminishes the idea of pastoral care for the thousands and thousands of people that are suffering by these anomalies and these these inappropriate views of the gospel.
One final point. You have mentioned publicly that the confidential documents of the committee have leaked out. The impression received by some listeners, at least, is that Des Ford is to blame. Now, the fact is that I have refrained from distributing copies to anyone despite repeated requests. Dr. Harder was given a copy, but not by me. It should be an easy matter to ask such recipients as Dr. Harder as to how they came by the materials. Then it would be unnecessary to give listeners the impression that I am the guilty partner. Should not the facts be sought before suppositions are publicly voiced? Please ask Dr. Harder on this matter and any others whom you find to have the documents. They did not get them from me. God bless you richly. I hope you'll take time to read the rewritten manuscript. God can only be honoured by truth and truthfulness. With the warmest regards. P.S. There's yet one more thing that comes to mind. You have publicly mentioned my failure to comply with the EGW statements about not voicing positions contrary to established ones. But Dr. Hamill, you know as well as I do that E.G. White also has a series of other statements on this matter concerning issues of importance. She says no one, not even a priest or a ruler, is to say, you shall not give publicity to your opinions. Furthermore, you also know that my statement was made to a forum group in response to a faculty request, and only after there was in circulation a book among SDAs saying the same things, but without my positive solution. That's Brinsmere's book. And after Ray Cottrell had said the same things at Andrews University. I have urged GC leaders for years to attend to this problem. When Elder Eva visited us with us in Australia, he mentioned as one reason why I should accept the call to PUC that I might share the Biblical Research Committee Institute research into the problems connected with the sanctuary. I understand that Elder Eva has forgotten making the statement now. It must have been just a casual expression on which we place more weight than we should, but it did influence it to make the decision to come to you. And then I've just said, I do not have the response to these letters among the documents, but I recall that Hamill denied biasing the workers against him. But Des was receiving reports about this from various individuals. He also said that he did not state where he agreed with Des. He only stated where he disagreed.
Yes, yeah. I tell you what,
those letters are dynamite, really.
Oh, incredible. What's hitting me is that it's so funny that I'm coming to this kind of understanding, and it's almost like I wish I could flip it right around, that I could have heard, if we'd done this in these interviews at the start, I would have been better prepared in season 2 to ask more interesting questions. But I kind of also acknowledge that things happen as in their own way in time and organically. So it's interesting to see my learning process as well, and hopefully others.
Well, I've learned a lot.
They can jump, and they can start here if they want. Or sorry, go ahead.
Well, I've learned a lot from going over all the documents, putting in them, keep on learning. But
so that's true. We just keep learning, and it's great. We've got inquiring minds. Now, did you say you want me to read the Jill
there's
to
2
Ken
letters.
and Eleanor?
No.
The August 27th?
No, because we're now going on to 2 separate ones.
Okay, so which ones did you want me to read?
These are the letters because they fit. Written and signed.
Are they in that document you sent me?
No, they're separate. I sent you 2 pages.
Oh, those 2 separate. All right. Yes.
Well, if you don't have them, I'll read them.
No. I've got them.
And I've only sent you 1 page of one of them, but it'll still give you the idea. This is in 1994.
This is the Falkenberg one?
Yeah.
Actually, you will have to read it because it's very tiny on my screen.
Okay. All right.
So just give us a quick bit of background again on that.
In retirement, and I would say that both of these men would be in their 90s, Ray Cottrell and Richard Hamill both came out speaking on the creation issue along long Earth, long creation, and also on the sanctuary. And Robert Falkenberg tried to have them disfellowshipped, both of these old men. So they're writing to complain, and unfortunately I've only got part of one of them, but anyway. Dear Brother Falkenberg, your April the 4th newsletter gratuitously misrepresents the substance, the tone, and the purpose of our April 2 Sabbath afternoon panel discussion as Adventist creationism. There was no attack on the historicity of Scripture and the Genesis account of creation. There was no attempt to discredit or downgrade the Bible record. There was no debate. There was no confrontation, either of persons or of concepts. Your newsletter statement is a gross misrepresentation of the meeting. The purpose of the panel discussions was to explore ways by which to correlate the observed phenomena of the natural world with the Bible account. The first three speakers were asked to pinpoint the problem areas, the last three to present what the church is doing and can do to reconcile the two sets of data. The meeting was constructive in purpose and in tone. I selected the panelists, all of whom have been personal friends of mine for an average of 39 years each. Ariel Roth and Edgar Hare were students at Pacific Union College when I was teaching Bible there 50 and 44 years ago, respectively. Richard Hamill, Robert Brown, and I have been friends for 44 and 30 years, respectively. Till my retirement in 1977, we participated together on the Geoscience Advisory Council and on numerous geology field trips. We have remained friends and have often conversed together ever since. I served as moderator of the panel. My remarks consisted of introducing the panel members. At no point did I make any comment on the subject under the discussion. Your statement that I participated in an attack on the historicity of Scripture and the Genesis account of creation is a brazen misrepresentation, not only of the facts, but of my personal belief as well. Dr. Richard Hamill's assigned topic was the founding of the Geoscience Research Institute, for which he was more responsible than any other one person. As a dedicated Seventh-day Adventist, I served the church faithfully for 47 years, prior to retirement 17 years ago. Since then, I've been teaching at Loma Linda and at La Sierra University, serving the Southeastern California Conference on various committees, and continue to be actively involved in our local church. Among many other things, I wrote the Constitution on which our conference now operates, and as chairman of our Mesa Grande Academy Board, I was responsible for a $2 million plus building project successfully completed and paid for. Let me make it clear, Elder Falkenberg, that I am for the church, not against it. Now, I don't have the end of that letter, and it's not on the topic, but they were being punished for their views on the sanctuary as well. So the
And
next letter.
who are they again? Just so that people
This
are
is
just
Richard Hamill. We've been reading his letters from Des's letter to him,
yeah.
and Ray Cottrell,
Yes.
who wrote a lot about the investigative judgment and the sanctuary and was in essential agreement with Des. So here's the second letter. just pointing out, these letters are showing that in old age they came out of the cracks and told where they really stood. And they got into trouble, and Robert Falkenberg, who sometime afterwards, I'm not sure how long afterwards, was relieved of his position because of some fraudulent behavior, which I won't go into. But anyway, dear Brother Falkenberg, same two people. At the time of writing our previous letters to you a few days ago, neither of us, Richard Hamill and Ray Cottrell, knew that the other was writing or that you'd personally inserted the following statement in your April 4 weekly newsletter to Adventist VIPs around the world. Historicity of Scripture and the Genesis account of creation came under attack last Sabbath afternoon, not by secular forces, but by two retired church workers, Ray Cottrell, retired Associate Director of the Adventist Review, Richard Hamill, retired Vice President of the General Conference, former President of Andrews University, during a panel debate in California. It's incredible to us to learn that the President of the General Conference himself approved the insertion of this false and malicious statement in his newsletter, independently of each other. When persons asked us if you'd done so yourself, we replied that we could not believe a person with your experience and reputation could have, but that some inexperienced office person had done so in your absence. In view of the facts that you are personally responsible, we invite you to restore our confidence in you personally and as President of the General Conference, one, by retracting the above statement and apologising to us and to recipients of it in your next newsletter. Two, coming to Loma Linda at your earliest convenience and giving us an hour of your time. 3, explaining your reasons for this blacklisting 2 persons whose entire lives have been devoted happily, faithfully, and loyal to the service of the church, without even checking on the accuracy of the misinformation or complying with Christ's admonition to go first to your brother, Matthew 18:15-17. 4, arranging for us to meet with the persons who provided you with this misinformation. In a democratic society, a person accused of some misdeed axiomatically has the right to meet his accuser face to face. We will greatly appreciate working things out with you to our mutual satisfaction. So that only gives part of the story, but you get my point of putting in. They turned out to be, once they retired, and it wasn't just on creation, it was also on the sanctuary, that they were in trouble over that.
Yes, yeah.
And you can read, Richard Hamill, he wrote his biography, he had a chapter on Glacier View, and he clearly didn't approve of how it was handled at the end.
When did the biography come out? Because those letters were 1994.
Yeah, it would be in the 90s, but I can't remember offhand. Those things I can look at on my other computer.
Yeah.
Easily, but not so much.
If someone has a link to his book, or anything by Lowe, I'd love to explore it a bit more.
But I think possibly that you'll find this talked about in the Spectrum. I'm not sure, but it just seemed like a happy ending to the correspondence, because we've talked about what basically Ray Cottrell agreed with Des on the investigative judgment, and we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
And Hamill, who acted very much as an administrator around Glacier View, he shows he was he was talking about, he studied somewhat the sanctuary issues while he was in the prison camp. He was about to teach on it, and then something happened and it didn't happen. But after he retired, he studied more about it. And he actually wrote, shortly before he died, something else, and Ray Cottrell sent Des the chapters, and I've got a letter from Hamill asking Des not to share it because it wasn't up to scratch, but it's illuminating on what he really believed.
And you've got that.
Now, everything I'm going to tell you, Hamill is just one illustration.
Yeah.
And I told you at the moment, and I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to put it in, but there was a Ford, Shea, Van Rooyen, Ortega debate in 1983, I think it was, in California. And it was on the investigative judgment. And both sides, see, this is the interesting thing, and I've only just started working on this. I've got the transcript. Altogether, the transcript is 90 pages, and it was done by the General Conference because they thought that Shea and Ortega, who were on the opposition defending the church, they thought that they won. So they paid for this huge thing to be transcribed, this debate.
Oh, wow. So where can we get a copy of that?
Well, I'm going to put part
You're going to put it into volume 3. Great.
I told you I had an article called Pyrotechnics at Fresno from Adventist Currents, and I actually had a copy of it, so I'm going to put that in the book. Where Doug Heckelman, that's a good Heckelman.
Because you can hear the roosters heckling in the background. That's why.
Yes. He wrote this article about the debate, which is quite humorous, and he points out that both sides stated a victory. And that very point shows you there's a dissonance.
Yes.
Got people who absolutely believe the traditional view, and nothing that you say can alter it. And then you've got people who are, who know there are problems, but even knowing that, like Hamill, Bill Johnson's another good example, and I could name a number of them who sound as though they're traditional, but in fact they know all the problems. And as I said, Bill Johnson said to Ellen, the investigative judgment, nobody teaches it. Of course, that's not true.
Yeah.
Because of Ted Wilson.
Yeah.
So these are the things you know, the mystery of it. And in the end, you stop feeling annoyed about it because it just is.
Yeah. And as I've said,
But
it's
Des,
chalk and cheese. These two groups are chalk and cheese. Yeah. It's so funny. My wife's calling me from outside the door. Now the girls call
well,
me,
we're
Dad,
done.
Dad, we're done. Well, it's a good place to end it. Look forward to next week. Just a quick reminder, Gillian's book. Coming, girls, won't be long.
So were you happy with that selection of letters?
Fantastic. Absolutely loved it. Can't wait for next week. I keep thinking, how can this get even more exciting? And it just keeps getting more interesting.
So I've put together so far, I haven't read them all, but 50 pages of letters. And then I've thought of another section I've got to do.
Yeah. Well, we can keep returning to it. I've said this is 2 of 3, but we might make it 4 or 5.
I told you my thought about why I did these books was because of the problems at Avondale Archives and access to the collection. I mean, most people don't even know it's there. And you would have to go through the catalogue because it's not going to be digitized and look, you know, it would be very, very good.
You've made it much easier for future researchers.
So what I've done is almost 1,500 pages of documents. And I certainly, it's from my point of view and it's interpreted. But some of it sort of speaks for itself.
Yeah, and people are smart enough to just see the actual documents and draw their own conclusions. And it's okay for you to have an opinion and for me to have an opinion and for us to share it. That's fine. And people will just read the documents and make their own, draw their own conclusions.
Without their knowing this is the Brethren's worst nightmare. Yeah. But fortunately, you know, I'm not going to promote it. I just want so many copies out there so that it's out there.
Yeah. Yes.
And I don't think it's not going to make any difference. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can say black's white, and people will still say that. You know.
But what I like about these letters, and I'm looking forward to next week as well. Same time, 11:30, Moto Sapien. I don't know what 11:30 is your time. Let's shoot me a message and we'll try and work it out. But what I'm enjoying is that they are creating a much better understanding for us. I'll be right there. Standing in the rain, she said. I better run. Thank you, everyone. Please, you know, support what I'm doing.
Hard on the voice.
Please support what I'm doing. There's my PayPal link. Your donations help me put and encourage me to put even more time into SDAQ&A. And we will head off. Thank you, Gillian. We'll see you next week. Let's try my new outro. See you, Gillian.